Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Government's IT Modernization Imperative, sponsored by GovPlace and Dell EMC on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your moderator, Jason Miller. My guests today are Thomas Beach, the Chief Data Strategist and Portfolio Manager of the Digital Service and Big Data at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, George Jacobson, the Chief Information Officer for the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, Jeff Schilling, the Chief of IT and Infrastructure Services at the National Cancer Institute, Majid Sadi, the Chief Technology Officer for GovPlace, and Bob Nicholson, the Business Development Manager for Dell Federal. Before break, Jeff, you got teed up from Majid perfectly. He said, there's an effort on the way, take it away. So jump in about the genomics and the cloud and how that all was fitting together.
Sure. So basically, we have the creation of new technologies, and in this case, it's generally sequencing technologies. So they're sequencing the human genome, and as that's being done, where do you store that? Where do you keep it? Where should the government provide a place to do it? And so the National Cancer Institute created a project called the Genomic Cloud, and the Genomic Data Commons, and that's contracted out to University of Chicago, and they're fantastic computer scientists. They created a way to accept data, they store that data, they document it for future use, and then they manage it for its whole lifetime. The other thing that's going on, they're moving their on-prem to the cloud providers, and then they're merging that data with the cloud pilots, which is basically standardized data sets that were generated on hundreds of tumors and that are used as a reference. So now scientists can put their data in the Genomic Data Commons, and they have a computing place so they can log in, do their computations, and run it against standardized data sets, so without moving any data around. So it can happen very quickly. They can do lots of one-off type thought experiments, where a lot of times that's hindered because it takes 2 weeks to get anything running and functioning. So I think it's a real logical way to approach cloud computing, is to say, what do we have a problem with? What resources do we have available to solve that problem? Can we use some of these new resources? And then for that specific issue and for that specific project, we can utilize cloud resources to solve the problem. And I think that's one of the things we're going to get to this next topic, is that do you just do lock, stock, and barrel type switch over, or do you really pick and choose projects to move, test the waters, learn how all this functions, learn how to optimize it, how to use these resources? And I think for us, it's been a big eye-opener, because we know we need very, very specific talent to be able to pull this off. There's a lot to know, and very, very few people who know it.
And it's a great example of really optimization of the service that you're providing, because you're saying it's not just, oh, well, we have this problem, let's write a web service and people can pull, but let's create this new approach, new way of doing business. I mean, is that what you guys, turn to Thomas or George maybe, are you guys also looking at that idea of a new approach to business and the cloud? Where does the cloud fit in? Tom?
Absolutely. So in our mandate that's constitutional, the Progress Clause for which you disseminate or disclose information, you're granted a patent or trademark. So we've been in the data dissemination business since the inception of this country. However, what we haven't done well is made it accessible, ready to use, and easily understood. So we tend to disseminate in image format, which is a very complicated process. One, either moving the documents or the large files back and forth. So the other piece is that there's not the raw data underneath that's really able to be analyzed. So we are now leveraging APIs. We're now looking at cloud environments. We're trying to solve this problem because there's a huge pent-up appetite for better understanding of what it is we do, how we make our products, and how we make quality products. And so for that to happen, the public has to have access to it. So we're looking at new ways and new opportunities to provide that data dissemination in a way that's powerful, that meets the user's needs, but also at the same time, as obviously we're all dealing with, we're confined with our 3-year-old federal budgets from years ago. So we're always looking for that sort of unlocking the value while also really understanding the value of our data. So we've come to recognize, and I think one of the things that was mentioned before, having a data strategy and actually knowing what your data means. Actually, what we did was take a step back and realize that our data is the leading indicator of R&D and innovation. So when we stood back and understood data by itself, I think I mentioned earlier, sort of dark data sits there, does nothing. Know the personality of your data, what does it mean? Because by itself it doesn't do anything. But understanding what it can be leveraged for allowed us new opportunities, such as working on the Vice President's Cancer Moonshot last year, disseminating a data set around patented technologies that have to do with cancer treatments, or better understanding what the user community needs. So optimization not only means critical path is our examiners, but also the user community, which is the world at large.
George, you brought up an interesting point as well, is I think we kind of talked about this earlier when Majid talked about this idea of the baseline, where you're starting from. But it's not just where you're starting from, it's where you want to go, if you will, the arc of the journey. Talk a little bit about how you guys are viewing that.
Sure. First of all, you can't stop the business. You have to continue doing what you're doing. And so often we get into the conundrum where we're doing the same thing over and over again. We talked about that earlier. So how do we force the conversation with the practitioner, with the subject matter experts, be they researchers, be they patent and trademark attorneys, be they investigators and auditors, and say, what do you want it to look like? And trying, asking the question, if you had a clean sheet of paper, is usually a pretty fruitless endeavor, because the first thing that you hear are crickets. But engaging in the conversation and saying, what are the things you want to be able to do with the information that is available to you? And of course, it has to start there, back to data again. What data is available to us? I can create an infrastructure based on today's construct that is far more efficient, it's modernized, maybe it's optimized from the standpoint of being able to do what I'm doing today much more efficiently and effectively. But how does that get me to the next stage? Well, if I don't know what that next stage is, it's back to, any road will get you there. So it's really important to understand that if I want to use some sort of technology that relies on masked array, for example, as opposed to more traditional client-server type of arrangement, I need to know that, and I need to know what that transition strategy, that's part of my job, our job, is to try and figure out what does that transition strategy look like? How do we move from where we are today to what that looks like? But if I don't know what that vision is, and I don't need to have a perfect vision, I just need to help me set the compass rose so that we're all moving in the same direction. We can make minor adjustments along the way. I think that's frustrating sometimes for our partners, because they look at us and say, well, why is this so hard? I just wanted to be able to do this. Well, we would tell you, we're dealing with fast idiots. That's what computers are. They can say 0 and 1. They can do it incredibly fast. They can do it against huge volumes of data, still small compared to what the human can process in nanoseconds. But nonetheless, that's all they're able to do. And unless you set up that software, unless you set up that storage, unless you set up that database in the proper environment, it means nothing. So I think that's our biggest challenge, is trying to get our partners to think more in terms of not the technology, but that journey. Where is it? What would you like to be able to do if you had the ability and you had this data set? What would you be able to do with that? How might your role change? And then the conversation shifts.
Bob, do you get that from your clients, or are they saying, as you're going to see the government agencies or private sector people, are they asking that question the way George is putting it?
Absolutely, and that's, it's kind of, that's where I led off with this entire conversation, right? It was just that, if we're expecting people to consume IT differently, we have to be in a position to sell it differently, right? And so it is a conversation. It's a conversation because it takes time, and so there's a lot of things to figure out. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, when that we've broken kind of our technology suites under those various pillars of transformation, right? And so if you want to transform how your workforce is operating, that's how we have to start the conversation. It's not, here's all of these IT offerings and then do they fit, right? And so we have to have the conversation there and then work back and say, well, now you've led into all of these options within the portfolio. Right?
And Majid, another piece to this is what George was saying is you have to know where you're going, but you also have to know what happens if things maybe don't go the way you wanted them to go, right?
If it rains in the cloud.
If it rains in your cloud. Talk a little bit about that idea of how do you ensure that flexibility. We don't want to get into the contracting talk per se, but there's a flexibility that's got to be built in to how you do compute, storage, and all the other pieces and parts.
Definitely. So we're starting to hear a lot of buzz around cloud exit strategy. We've heard multiple examples of smaller migrations that took place and workloads that got migrated to the cloud. And all of a sudden, there are some surprises in terms of overcharging or expectations that were not set for how the workload would be operating. What we're starting to see is a lot of language in RFPs and RFIs that call for at least mentioning a process for determining a cloud exit strategy. And I say process because for the longest time, there weren't a lot of technologies that enable you to do that. But that's changing a lot. The private sector has been able to get over that hurdle. And there's a lot of technologies that are starting to develop that you can actually utilize to do that real-time conversion that allows you at a certain point to decide to leave a specific environment. And that requires a lot of automation and translation that has to be built into these technologies. This is why I think they were kind of late. This is why there was a lot of talk about cloud computing, but there weren't a lot of these technologies available. An example to mention is a technology called Rackware, which enables you to basically read the native format of the cloud that you're migrating from or to, and enables you to even roll back and take some of those workloads and put them back in your data center. And sometimes it's in between two data centers that the government might control or might be controlled by contractors. At minimum, what I would recommend to all of our customers is consider how you want to be able to exit the cloud. Put some language in there for the level of automation that you require or the level of conversion that you require so that you can extract your data out at minimum and preferably extract the entire workload and allow it to be portable into any cloud or at minimum to your data center.
And you brought up recommendations, and we're just about out of time, so we're going to go through a quick lightning round of recommendations. Let me start with Tom Beach from PTO. As you guys are doing the optimization, modernization, if agencies, there's no agencies that are at 0 and nobody's at 100, everyone's in the middle somewhere, but what are some of the lessons you've learned, best practices you've learned?
So for us, we've learned to focus and know your primary client's needs and how to align your data strategy to the mission of the agency. So we are to timely deliver quality patents and trademarks. So with that paradigm, we have to know that what we're trying to deliver are next-gen applications, but at the same time, we're trying to deliver the capability of analytics. And delivery of a capability is much different than actually delivering an application or a piece of software. So we look at open analytics and opening ways where we're now inviting the business unit, because there's nobody better than the patents division or the trademarks division that knows their business. And translating their business into IT needs is the most fundamental piece of the conversation that I think readily gets misconstrued. We immediately jump to sort of the technical requirements, and we fail to sort of remember what is the business requirement that we're really, really trying to solve.
George.
I think one of the key factors is knowing where your data is. There was a recent case that is now causing some legislation to be brought forth. A result of a subpoena, the data was stored out OCONUS, and so the supplier said, "Oh, I don't have to provide it." The court basically agreed with them. So here was a whole slug of data that was missing that may have been material, may not have been material. How do you know? So I think you have to make that determination as part of your SLA, make that imperative. I need to know where the data is, back to Majid's point about being able to extract and pull it out and destroy it if it's determined that I no longer want to be part of this construct. I need to get that information back. I would say that's probably the most important thing. Know where your data is.
Jeff.
For me, it's people, process, technology, and it's the people. You have to have a great workforce. You have to build that workforce up, reward them, make them know that they're the things that turn these fast, stupid machines into amazing solutions. And the other side is the staff you're building these solutions for. They need training. They don't know all the things we
They
know.
don't know the world of the possible.
They do not, and they need to be trained.
Majid?
So I would call again for all agencies to basically start baselining their workloads. If you're currently baselining the data, then make more use of it. Enable it to allow you to make better decisions. And if you're not doing that, start doing it. Whether you're looking to just optimize in-house or move to the cloud or even create a hybrid environment, baselining your data, baselining your utilization lines, and understanding the performance expectations is extremely important and should be step number one.
All right, Bob, you get the last word.
Sure. I mean, it is a journey. I mean, I think we've established that, right? And so there's going to be different stages to it. And so, all of the information, keep that feedback loop going, continue the conversation, going forward, and just dedicate everything to open standards, no proprietary, because it's going to be building blocks that you need. You need a modular capacity. So.
Very good, all great advice, and I'd like to thank our guests for their efforts and their thoughts today. That's all the time we have. Thomas Beach, the Chief Data Strategist and Portfolio Manager of the Digital Service and Big Data at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. George Jacobson, the Chief Information Officer for the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. Jeff Schilling, the Chief of IT and Infrastructure Services at the National Cancer Institute. Majid Sadi, the Chief Technology Officer for GovPlace, and Bob Nicholson, the Business Development Manager for Dell Federal, were our guests today. I'd like to thank them for their time and participating in the panel discussion. Government's IT Modernization Imperative, sponsored by GovPlace and Dell EMC on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search GovPlace.
On behalf of GovPlace and Dell EMC, thank you for joining us. A link to the archived session will be sent to you shortly. If you requested a training certificate, you will also receive an email with download instructions after the webinar. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.